Without any order, the Alpha King's ancient beast knelt before her. The sun had long vanished behind the jagged mountains of Werewolf, leaving the kingdom bathed in a twilight of cold blue and violet. Mist clung to the narrow streets of the capital like a living curtain, and the scent of damp stone and burning torches hung thick in the air. Lady Elra's carriage rolled slowly along the cobbled path, wheels grinding against the ancient stones. She peered through the open window, her dark eyes tracing the towers that pierced the evening sky. Each stone seemed older than memory itself, whispering tales of kings and beasts, of power and of fear. She had not come for comfort, nor for safety. Elara's journey had been long, across forests that hummed with ancient magic and rivers that refused to forget her footsteps. She had heard the rumors of a king whose authority reached beyond men, a ruler whose gaze alone could bend loyalty and fear alike. And yet, beneath those whispers, she sensed something more, an invisible chain that connected her to the fate of this kingdom. The gates of Werewolf rose before her like the jaws of a slumbering beast. Guards clad in black steel and silver filigree watched her approach with disciplined eyes, but they did not move to stop her. Perhaps the tales of her bloodline had already reached them. Perhaps the shadows themselves had recognized her coming. Inside the castle, the air was warmer, thick with incense and the quiet murmur of courtiers. Elara's cloak fell to her shoulders, revealing a gown of deep green, simple yet elegant, designed not to draw attention, yet impossible to ignore. She felt the weight of eyes upon her, and a thrill, equal parts fear and exhilaration, ran down her spine. The throne room was vast, lined with columns carved in the likeness of ancient beasts. At the far end sat the king, his presence impossible to overlook. King Calthar, his hair black as midnight, fell in straight lines to his shoulders. His eyes were a storm of gray and silver, sharp and penetrating, as though they could see into the very marrow of one's soul. He rose slowly, a movement both regal and dangerous, and walked toward her with a quiet certainty that made the courtiers tremble in place. Elara's heart beat faster, though she fought to keep her face calm. She had traveled far, faced dangers that would have felled lesser souls, yet she found herself feeling unprepared in the presence of the Alpha King. Still, she met his gaze without bowing too quickly, holding the dignity that had carried her through exile. "You have come far, Lady Elara," Calthar said, his voice smooth but edged with authority. "Yet your arrival is not without risk. The court does not take kindly to outsiders bearing secrets." "I am not here to bring harm," Elara replied, her voice steady, though her pulse thrummed beneath it. "I seek only counsel and understanding. The kingdom, it suffers from shadows that linger longer than they should."
"I can help."
Calthar's eyes narrowed as if weighing each word, each breath. The silence stretched, thick and potent, until the courtiers shifted uneasily, whispering behind her back. Finally, Calthar inclined his head. "Very well," he said, almost reluctantly. "You may stay, but know this, Lady Elara. Werewolf has its own ways of judging loyalty and power." "We do not forgive easily." Elara bowed slightly, her mind racing. Every corner of the castle seemed alive, and she could not shake the feeling that unseen eyes watched her even beyond the guards and courtiers. That night, sleep was a stranger. She lay upon the silk sheets of her guest chamber, listening to the wind sigh through the stone walls. Her thoughts wandered to the rumors she had heard of Calthar, of the beasts bound to his will, of his ruthless dominion over men and monsters alike. She felt a pull toward him, a mixture of fear and fascination that was difficult to name. The next day she was escorted through the castle gardens, where twisted trees grew beneath the shadow of spires. Birds of strange colors watched silently from the branches, and the flowers seemed too vibrant for the fading light of Werewolf. It was here, amidst the unnatural beauty, that she first saw the creature. It was massive, larger than any horse, more formidable than any wolf she had seen. Its fur was dark as obsidian, eyes glinting with an intelligence almost human in their depth. Yet it did not attack nor flee. It nearly knelt upon the ground, bowing its great head in a gesture that sent shivers through Alara's spine. Her breath caught. This was Kael'thar's ancient beast. The guardian whispered about in hushed tones throughout the kingdom. And yet, it seemed not to see Kael'thar. It had seen her. "You feel it, do you not?" said a voice behind her. Kael'thar had approached without sound, as though he were part of the shadows themselves. He did not startle her, though she had not heard his footsteps. "It does not bow to kings, only to those who hold the truth within them." Elara's hands clenched, unsure whether to step back or closer. What does that mean? Kael'thar studied her with those storm-gray eyes, intense and unreadable. It recognizes power that is not yet claimed, loyalty that is not yet earned. It knows fear, and yet it chooses reverence. A strange hush fell over the garden. The beast raised its head slowly, and its eyes met hers again. Alara felt an unspoken understanding, a thread weaving between them that was older than memory. She did not feel fear as she had expected. Instead, she felt called. Over the days that followed, Alara learned the rhythm of the castle. Kael'thar was demanding but fair, testing her wit and courage with words and subtle challenges. They spoke often, in corridors lit by flickering torchlight, or in the high library where dust motes danced in golden beams. Every exchange carried tension, a push and pull that neither could name. Kael'thar's questions were sharp, designed to reveal more than mere intelligence. They sought to measure her strength, her resolve, and perhaps her heart. Elara found herself revealing small truths, carefully chosen, yet feeling as though each word connected them in ways deeper than reason. There was a magnetism between them, quiet but undeniable, like two forces drawn together by something far older than either of them. Yet not all eyes in the court welcomed her presence. Whispers followed her like shadows. Some nobles looked upon her with envy, others with suspicion, believing she sought to manipulate the king. Still, Elara stood firm, navigating the treacherous waters with grace and caution. One evening, Kael'thar led her to the edge of the cliff overlooking the kingdom. The moon hung low, casting a silver path across the dark waters below. The wind tugged at her cloak, carrying the scent of stone and rain. "You see Veilrath," he said quietly, "but you do not see it truly. The kingdom lives, breathes, and watches. Its heart beats beneath shadows and fear alike. To serve it, one must first understand the darkness and then decide whether to embrace it or defy it." Elara turned to him, feeling the weight of his gaze upon her. "And what of those who do not wish to embrace it?" she asked. Kael'thar's expression softened, just slightly, revealing a shadow of vulnerability beneath the steel of his kingly mask. They learn that even the strongest can be bound by forces they do not control. Before she could respond, a distant roar split the night, reverberating through the cliffs and echoing against the castle walls. The ancient beast appeared on the ridge above them, its massive form outlined against the moonlight. Its eyes gleamed, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. Kael'thar's hand brushed lightly against hers. Not quite touch, not quite distance. An unspoken acknowledgement of their growing connection. Yet before any word could pass between them, the beast moved, leaping toward her with astonishing speed. But instead of aggression, it knelt once more, bowing its head in an almost ceremonial gesture. Alara felt her breath catch again. She knelt slowly, instinctively, unsure why she did so, yet compelled by a force older than thought. She reached out, fingers trembling, and rested a hand upon the beast's head. Its fur was softer than she expected, warm with life and strength. Kael'thar watched silently, his expression unreadable, yet his eyes betrayed a storm of emotion, pride, surprise, something deeper, more dangerous. The beast lifted its head, its gaze meeting hers again, and in that moment Ilara understood. Her arrival in Vailrath was no accident. She had been called here not by chance, but by a fate that stretched beyond kings and beasts, beyond shadows and time itself. The wind whispered through the cliffside trees, carrying the echo of a promise, a warning, and a challenge all at once. Ilara rose, heart pounding, knowing that the days to come would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. And yet, despite the fear, despite the unknown, she felt an ember of courage flare within her chest, for in the shadow of the Alpha King, and before the ancient beast that knelt, she sensed a destiny that might yet be hers to claim, or lose entirely. The night deepened, the kingdom stretched silent below them, and Ilara knew one thing for certain: nothing in Vailrath would ever be the same again. The castle of Vailrath never truly slept. Even when torches burned low and the corridors were silent, the stones themselves seemed alive, whispering of kings long dead and beasts older than memory. Lady Ilara walked these halls now with careful steps, her heart still echoing the encounter with the ancient beast on the cliff. Every shadow seemed to watch her. Every whisper of wind carried a secret she could not yet understand. King Caelthar, meanwhile, observed her from the edge of the grand staircase, his arms crossed over his chest, eyes sharp. The moment she entered the hall, he felt the pull again. Quiet tension, the spark of something he had not allowed himself to feel in decades. It was not power that drew him, not curiosity alone. It was recognition. And that frightened him more than any sword or curse ever could. "Lady Ilara," he said, his voice echoing softly through the stone chamber. "You move through these halls as though they belonged to you." Ilara stopped, turning to meet his gaze.
"I am learning, my lord," she replied. "I must understand Vailrath if I am to help."
Caelthar inclined his head slowly, as though weighing her words.
"Knowledge alone is not enough. You must also understand fear,
Loyalty, and the shadows that lie between them. And if I do not, then the shadows will understand you," he said, his tone calm yet carrying the weight of inevitability. That evening, the first frost of the season dusted the castle gardens in a pale silver coat. Ilara moved among the twisted trees and strange flowers, her thoughts heavy with questions. The beast had not left her mind since the cliff, its enormous eyes full of intelligence and something else she could not name, haunted her dreams. And Caelthar haunted her waking moments. There was a pull between them, undeniable, though neither spoke it aloud. A rustle among the branches made her start. She spun, hand reaching for the dagger at her side, though it was unnecessary. The ancient beast emerged, silent and enormous, its fur dark against the frost. Its eyes found hers, and for a moment the air between them was charged with an unspoken understanding.
"You came again," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly.
The beast lowered its massive head. Ilara approached slowly, her hand outstretched. When her fingers brushed against its fur, warmth and strength flowed into her, a strange connection she could not explain. She felt its awareness, its attention, and a strange certainty. The beast did not kneel for kings or fear. It knelt for her. Footsteps sounded behind her, soft yet deliberate. Caelthar stepped into the moonlight, his eyes fixed on her, on the beast.
"You feel it, do you not?" he said, though not as a question. Ilara looked at him, searching his face for meaning.
Something old and powerful. Caelthar's expression softened for the briefest moment. "You feel the bond," he murmured. "The beast does not kneel lightly. It is a creature of loyalty and ancient memory. You have awakened it because it recognizes your heart." Her heart quickened, but she did not respond. There was something in the way he said it, something unspoken, that made her pulse erratic and her thoughts scatter. She had faced exile, storms, and hunger, yet the weight of his gaze unsettled her more than any danger. Days passed, and Elara's presence in the castle began to stir unease among the courtiers. Whispered conversations followed her in every hall, and the glances she received were tinged with suspicion or envy. But Keothar's attention never wavered. He began to test her, not with battles or swords, but with words, challenges, and questions designed to probe her courage and intelligence. One afternoon he summoned her to the High Library, a place where dust motes danced in beams of late afternoon sun and the smell of old parchment filled the air. "Sit," he commanded softly, gesturing to a chair near a massive oak table. Elara obeyed, heart fluttering, aware of the tension between them. He began to speak of the kingdom, its history, and the shadows that clung to its stones. But his words often turned to her, probing her thoughts and fears, challenging her to see what lay beneath her careful composure. "You are not like the others," he said suddenly. "You do not seek power for yourself, yet you carry it as though it were your own shadow. Do you understand what that means?" Elara paused, searching for the right words. "It means responsibility," she said finally, "and danger, perhaps more than I am ready for." Keothar's gaze did not waver. "Danger is the price of power," he replied. "And yet, it is also the test of courage." "You must learn to walk between them, Lady Elara, if you wish to survive, and to help this kingdom." Their conversations became a ritual of tension and learning. Keothar was careful, demanding, yet in every lesson there was an acknowledgement of her strength. Elara found herself drawn into the rhythm of these encounters, aware that each exchange brought them closer, even as the walls of propriety and fear remained between them. One evening, as the sky burned with the colors of dusk, Keothar led her to the castle balcony overlooking the kingdom. The wind whipped at her cloak, and the lights of Vaelrath flickered below like scattered stars. "Look at the kingdom," he said softly, "and see not only what it is, but what it could be. Power is not always visible, and loyalty is not always earned by fear. Sometimes it is awakened by courage and by trust." Elara looked at him, understanding the meaning but feeling the weight of it pressing on her chest. She wanted to speak, to ask about the bond between them, but the words caught in her throat. The pull between them was palpable, yet forbidden by the unspoken rules of court and duty. The sudden roar of the ancient beast interrupted their silence, echoing across the cliffs. Its massive form appeared, outlined against the fading light. It did not charge, it did not attack. Instead, it knelt once more, its gesture solemn and deliberate. Keothar's hand brushed against hers, not fully, yet close enough that warmth traveled through her arm. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, an unspoken promise, and a warning all at once. Elara knelt slightly before the beast, following its example instinctively. When her hand touched its dark fur, she felt the connection deepen. The beast's eyes seemed to reflect not only loyalty but understanding, as though it knew secrets she had not yet spoken aloud. "The bond has begun," Keothar said quietly behind her, "and it will grow whether we are ready or not." Days later, the court faced the first signs of unease. Strange happenings stirred in the palace. Whispers that carried farther than they should, shadows that moved on their own, and objects that seemed to shift without reason. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones of a curse awakening, though none could say from where it had come. Elara felt the tension mounting. She wandered through the castle halls late one night, sensing the eyes of the beast following her from the shadows. Keothar appeared beside her without sound, his expression unreadable.
"You feel it too?" she said softly.
"Yes," he replied, "and soon it will test us both. The kingdom does not forgive weakness or hesitation. That is why you must be ready, and why I must trust you."
Elara turned to him, startled.
"Trust me?" Keothar's eyes softened slightly. But the storm remained.
Yes.
Trust is not given lightly in Vaelrath, and neither is power. But if the kingdom is to survive what comes next, we must face it together.
That night, as the moon rose high over the castle, Elara could not sleep.
The shadows seemed deeper, the wind more insistent. She wandered into the gardens once more, where frost glimmered like silver dust. The ancient beast appeared again, silent and majestic, kneeling before her. Elara knelt, as she had before, and placed her hands on its massive head. She felt the flow of strength and memory, of loyalty and knowledge that spanned centuries. It was more than a creature. It was a guardian, a mirror of destiny, and a reminder that she was no longer simply a visitor in Vaelrath. And then, a sound of breaking stone echoed through the garden. She and Kelthar turned toward the source, hearts racing. Shadows writhed unnaturally across the ground, and a cold wind swept the frost into swirling patterns. The first sign of the curse had arrived. The beast growled low in its throat, eyes flashing. Kelthar stepped in front of Elara, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, grounding her even as fear prickled her skin.
We will face this, he said firmly, his voice calm, but his eyes betraying the storm within.
Together, Elara nodded, her pulse steadying. Yet even as she felt the strange electric bond between them strengthen, she could not shake the feeling that the challenges ahead would test more than courage. They would test loyalty, love, and the very limits of their hearts. The wind whispered through the garden once more, carrying the promise of danger and the echo of the beast's low, solemn growl.
Elara understood, with a certainty she could not explain, that nothing in Vaelrath would ever be the same.
And in the stillness, Kelthar's stormy eyes met hers once again. The pull between them was undeniable, and the bond they had begun to forge would not be broken, no matter what darkness came next. The kingdom of Vaelrath had changed. Where once the streets had hummed with cautious life, there was now unease that clung to every stone and whispered in every corridor. Shadows moved where they should not, and the wind carried whispers of things unseen. Lady Elara felt the change in her bones, a cold tremor that spoke of a power awakening, one older and darker than the kingdom itself. She stood in the high library with King Kelthar, sunlight spilling in through stained glass, painting the floor with fractured colors. Maps, scrolls, and tomes lay scattered across the long oak table, evidence of the hours they had spent studying the kingdom's history and the curse that now stirred. "This is worse than I imagined," Elara said quietly, her hands brushing over an old map of Vaelrath's forests and mountains. "The shadows are spreading faster than we thought. And the beasts, they feel it too. Even your guardian senses the change." Scythe. Kelthar leaned over the map, his storm-gray eyes scanning each line, each mark, with precision. "The curse is not simple," he said. "It does not come from a single source. It is older than Vaelrath itself, tied to the throne and the stones, to the very air we breathe. Whoever cast it, or whatever awakens it, seeks more than fear. It seeks control." Elara shivered, despite the warmth of the room. "How do we stop it?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Kelthar looked at her then, and for a brief moment the usual steel of his expression faltered. "We do not stop it alone," he said. "We cannot. We face it together, or not at all." That night, Elara could not sleep. The castle felt alive in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. Shadows moved against the walls, twisting and stretching as though testing the boundaries of reality. Somewhere in the distance, the ancient beast's low growl echoed, a reminder that danger was near. She wandered through the palace gardens, her cloak brushing the frost-covered ground. Moonlight glimmered across the twisted branches, making the shadows dance, and there it was, the beast, massive and silent, kneeling once more, its eyes fixed on her. "You feel it too," she murmured, her breath visible in the cold air. The creature nodded slowly, its presence both terrifying and reassuring. Elara reached out, placing a hand upon its fur, feeling the surge of power and memory that flowed between them. It was not just loyalty she sensed, it was understanding. The beast recognized her, and in doing so, reminded her that her arrival in Vaelrath had been no accident. Before she could move, Kelthar appeared from the shadows, silent and sure. "The curse grows stronger," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of command. "It will not remain confined to whispers and shadows. Soon it will touch every corner of the kingdom, every stone, every life." Elara turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Then we must go to it," she said, feeling courage rise despite the fear in her chest. "We cannot wait for it to come to us. We must face it in the lands it haunts." Kelthar regarded her silently, then nodded.
"Very well. We leave at dawn.
But know this, the lands we cross are older than any man, and darker than any shadow you have known. You must be ready for the truth of them, and the truth of yourself." The journey began before the sun could rise. They traveled beyond the walls of Vaelrath, through forests where the trees grew so tall that sunlight barely touched the ground. Mist clung to every branch, thick as smoke, and the air smelled of earth and old magic. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, as though the forest itself was alive and watching. Elara rode beside Kelthar, the reins of her horse held loosely in her hands. The ancient beast followed silently behind, enormous and graceful despite its size. The bond between them was no longer subtle. It was undeniable. Every glance, every gesture carried a meaning they both felt but dared not speak aloud. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker. Shadows moved against shadows, whispers threading through the trees. Elara's heart raced as she felt the power of the curse pressing against her, not like a blade, but like a weight that threatened to bend her very soul. Kelthar dismounted, his hand steadying her.
"Stay close," he said. "The forest tests the heart, not only the body."
Fear can mislead even the strongest. Elara nodded, her eyes scanning the darkness. They moved silently, following a narrow path that twisted like a serpent through the ancient trees. Then, from the mist, came the first true sign of the curse. A figure emerged, humanoid in shape but shifting, its form uncertain, as if made of smoke and shadow. Elara gasped, clutching Kelthar's arm. The creature moved toward them, silent yet full of menace. The beast growled low, stepping between them with a ferocity that made the shadows shrink. Kelthar drew his sword, its blade glinting in the dim light. "Stand firm," he commanded.
It feeds on doubt and fear. Do not give it what it wants.
Elara's hands trembled, but she took a deep breath. She reached out, feeling the strength of the ancient beast flow through her, grounding her, steadying her. The shadow creature halted, as though sensing her resolve, then dissipated into the mist with a hiss that echoed like wind through stone. Kelthar lowered his sword, but his eyes never left her. "Good," he said quietly. "You held." That is no small thing. Elara met his gaze, her pulse still racing. She did not speak, but the look between them carried more than words could. Respect, acknowledgement, and something else, something fragile, yet growing between them. They continued through the forest, encountering more signs of the curse. Trees twisted unnaturally. Whispers of voices long dead called from the shadows, and small animals fled at their approach. Each challenge tested their courage and their bond, forcing them to rely on each other in ways that were both frightening and intimate. One night, they made camp near a clearing where the moonlight fell like silver fire. The beast lay nearby, its massive head resting on its paws, eyes alert. Elara tended the fire, her thoughts heavy with worry and the weight of what lay ahead. Kelthar joined her, sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Do you regret coming?"
he asked quietly, his eyes fixed on the fire.
Alara looked at him, surprised. "No," she said slowly. "Not even with all this darkness, all this danger." Kael'thar's gaze softened, just slightly. "It is rare for anyone to face what we do and still stand without fear. You are strong, Alara. Stronger than you know." Her breath caught. The words carried more than praise. They carried recognition, and perhaps something like trust. Before they could speak further, the wind shifted, carrying a chill that made the fire flicker. Shadows moved unnaturally along the edge of the clearing. The ancient beast growled low, rising to its feet, massive and imposing. "They are coming," Kael'thar said, his voice calm but urgent. "The curse takes shape. We must face it together, or it will consume not just us, but the kingdom." Alara rose, drawing strength from the beast and from Kael'thar's presence beside her. She felt a strange courage rising in her chest, a flame that refused to be snuffed out by fear. She was no longer just a visitor in Vaelrath. She was a part of its fate, bound to its king, and to the ancient forces that stirred in the shadows. The curse came then, fully, a wave of darkness that twisted the trees and howled through the forest. The shadow forms swirled, humanoid yet unreal, moving toward them with intent. Kael'thar's sword flashed in the moonlight, cutting through the forms with precise, practiced strokes, while Alara reached for the bond she shared with the beast. The creature lunged, moving with terrifying speed and grace, its massive body striking the shadows and scattering them into smoke. Alara placed her hands on its head, feeling its power flow into her, strengthening her resolve. Together they were more than king and visitor, more than beast and seer. They were a force, united against the darkness. Hours passed in a blur of movement and effort. When dawn broke, the forest fell silent, as if holding its breath. The shadows had receded, but the memory of them lingered like frost on stone. Kael'thar and Alara stood together, breathing heavily, eyes meeting across the clearing. "You did well," Kael'thar said finally, sheathing his sword. "The curse tests more than strength. It tests the heart, and yours is stronger than you know." Elara's hands trembled, but she smiled faintly. "We faced it together," she said. Kael'thar's storm-gray eyes softened. "Yes, together." The ancient beast knelt beside them, its massive head lowering in a gesture of respect and understanding. Alara reached out once more, feeling the connection deepen. The bond between them had grown stronger through fire and shadow, and she sensed that the trials to come would require even greater courage, trust, and sacrifice. As they began the journey back toward Vaelrath, the first light of morning spilling across the trees, Alara knew one thing: the kingdom's fate, and theirs, was no longer uncertain. The curse had awakened, yes, but so had something else, a bond, forged in shadow and trial, that would not easily be broken. And yet, even as hope stirred, a whisper of warning carried on the wind. The curse was not finished. The darkness that had tested them in the forest was only the beginning. Greater challenges awaited, and the choice between survival and surrender would soon demand everything they had: heart, courage, and trust. The kingdom of Vaelrath held its breath. Night had fallen with an unnatural heaviness, and shadows clung to the streets and towers as though afraid to leave. Lady Alara stood at the edge of the cliff once more, the wind tugging at her cloak, her hair whipping around her face. The kingdom lay below, silent but aware. She could feel the pulse of magic, the heartbeat of the curse that had awakened in the forest, spreading now toward the very heart of Vaelrath. King Kael'thar appeared at her side without sound, as he always did, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the moonlight. The bond between them had grown stronger through every trial, every shadow faced. And yet, even now, there was fear in his eyes, a shadow he had not shared with anyone before. "The curse has grown," he said quietly, his voice carrying both command and concern. "It is no longer confined to the forest or the outskirts. It seeks the throne itself, and with it, the destruction of all we hold dear." Elora nodded, gripping the hilt of the small dagger she carried more out of habit than need. "Then we must meet it where it is strongest," she said, her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. "We cannot let it reach Veilrath." Kael'thar's hand brushed hers briefly, a simple touch that carried weight and reassurance. "You have learned to face what others fear. Together, we will end this if we trust each other completely." The ancient beast emerged from the shadows behind them, massive and solemn, its eyes reflecting understanding and loyalty. It lowered its head in a gesture that seemed almost ceremonial. Elara placed her hands upon its dark fur, feeling the flow of its strength, its memory, and its connection to the kingdom. The journey to the throne's shadow began as dawn broke, the first light spilling in pale silver across the mountains. They moved through the valley that stretched beneath the cliffs, where the air shimmered with the curse's power. Trees twisted unnaturally, and the ground seemed alive, shifting beneath their steps. Shadow forms darted along the edges of their vision, whispering threats that were almost human in sound. "Elara," Kael'thar said, halting in a small clearing. "This is more than a test of skill. The curse challenges the heart. We must be ready for what we fear most, not the shadows, but ourselves." Elara took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. "Then we will face it together," she said. The words felt heavy, binding her not only to him but to the fate of the kingdom. The throne chamber itself awaited, carved from stone older than Veilrath, and hidden deep beneath the royal palace. The doors were massive, etched with symbols that pulsed faintly with the curse's energy. As they approached, the shadows gathered like smoke, curling and twisting, forming shapes of lost kings, fallen warriors, and creatures born from nightmares. Kael'thar's hand rested lightly on Alara's shoulder. "Stay close," he said. "Fear can fracture the mind and weaken the soul. Trust in the bond between us." Elara nodded, feeling the ancient beast's presence at her side, radiating power and loyalty. Together, they stepped into the chamber. The air inside was thick and cold, charged with energy that prickled their skin. At the center of the chamber sat a figure, tall, dark, and impossibly still. The curse had taken form. A being of shadow and memory, a reflection of every fear, every doubt that had haunted Veilrath for centuries. Its eyes glowed with a cold, unforgiving light. "You come at last," the shadow said, its voice echoing through the chamber like the rustling of dead leaves. "The kingdom cannot survive." "You cannot survive. All will fall into darkness." Kael'thar stepped forward, sword drawn, though his eyes never left Elara. "The kingdom will endure," he said, his voice steady and commanding, "and we will not fall." "Not while we stand together." Elara's hands glowed faintly with the energy she had learned to wield, drawn from the bond with the ancient beast. She stepped forward, facing the shadow, feeling fear, determination, and a strange exhilaration all at once. "You cannot control me," the shadow hissed, swirling around them. "You are mortal, and yet you dare challenge what has existed longer than kings or stone." "We are not alone," she said, "and together we are stronger than you can imagine." The chamber erupted in movement. Shadow forms surged toward them, twisting and writhing, testing their courage. The ancient beast roared, leaping forward, scattering the shadows with a force that made the ground tremble. Kael'thar's sword flashed in the dim light, precise and unyielding, cutting through darkness as if it were smoke.
Elara reached out, feeling the flow of the beast's strength and the bond they shared.
Energy surged through her, radiating outward in waves that pushed the shadows back. Each movement, each gesture, required focus and trust, for even the smallest lapse could give the curse the advantage. The shadow advanced, forming a wall of darkness that pulsed and shifted. Its eyes bore into Calthar, then into Alara, testing their resolve, seeking doubt, seeking fear. Calthar stepped forward, placing himself between the shadow and Alara, his sword raised. "We do not falter," he said, and in his voice was a command that resonated beyond words. Alara met his gaze and smiled faintly, a gesture of reassurance and unity. She raised her hands, calling forth the energy she had drawn from the beast and the kingdom itself. The bond was no longer subtle. It blazed, a ribbon of light and power linking her, Calthar, and the guardian at their side. The shadow recoiled, hissing as the light struck it.
"No, this cannot be!"
it shouted. Its form wavered, flickering, as if the combined courage and bond of the three of them was unraveling centuries of darkness. Calthar pressed forward, each step precise, each strike of his sword cutting through shadow. Alara followed, her energy flowing outward, steady and relentless. The ancient beast leapt again and again, each movement scattering the forms, each growl a declaration of loyalty and power. Finally, they reached the center of the chamber. The shadow writhed, a mass of anger and fear, yet the bond between Alara, Calthar, and the beast was unbroken. Together they focused their strength, not to destroy, but to command. Alara placed a hand on Calthar's arm, feeling the pulse of his power and determination, and together they poured their courage, trust, and hope into the darkness. The shadow screamed, a sound like wind through broken stone. Its form faltered, then dissolved, leaving the chamber still and silent. Light returned, gentle and warm, filling the throne chamber with a sense of peace that had not been there in centuries. Calthar lowered his sword, breathing heavily, his eyes finding Alara's. You did it," he said, awe and relief in his voice. "We did it. Together." Alara smiled, exhausted but triumphant. "We faced it," she said, "and survived." The ancient beast knelt beside them, its head lowering in reverence. Alara placed her hand upon its fur, feeling the bond solidify, a connection of loyalty, strength, and trust that would last beyond this night. Calthar stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face.
"You have changed everything," he said softly.
"Not only the kingdom, but me, and even this beast." Alara's heart quickened, the weight of their journey and the intensity of the bond between them leaving her breathless.
"And you have changed me,"
she whispered. They stood together in silence, the kingdom below stretching wide and bright in the morning light. For the first time since she had arrived, Alara felt at home, not in a place, but in the bond they shared, in the trust forged through shadow, danger, and courage. Days later, Werewolf began to heal. The shadows receded, the forest returned to its natural rhythm, and the kingdom slowly remembered light. Courtiers who had doubted Alara's intentions now bowed in respect, though none could speak fully of the bond that had saved them. Calthar returned to his throne, yet the presence of Alara and the ancient beast remained by his side. Together they had faced the darkness, not as king and visitor, not as ruler and seer, but as equals bound by courage, loyalty, and trust. One evening as the sun set in colors of gold and violet, Calthar and Alara stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The ancient beast rested nearby, massive and calm, its eyes reflecting the twilight. "Alara," Calthar said, his voice low. "Werewolf has been tested. So have we. And yet, I find—"
"I am not afraid. Not while you are here."
Alara turned to him, her hand finding his. "Nor I," she said. "Not while we face it together." Calthar smiled faintly, a rare and genuine expression. "Then let the kingdom remember this day not for fear nor for shadow, but for courage, loyalty, and the bond that held us through the darkness. She laughed softly, the sound bright against the quiet evening. For the first time since she had arrived in Vailrath, she felt not only courage but peace, a sense that she had not only survived destiny, but embraced it fully. The wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying the echoes of shadow and light, of danger and trust, and of hearts that had found each other in the midst of darkness. And in that moment, Vailrath was no longer merely a kingdom of stone and shadow. It was a place of bond and courage, of kings and guardians, of hearts that had faced the impossible and emerged stronger. The ancient beast knelt once more, this time not in warning nor in fear, but in acknowledgement of what had been forged, a bond, a redemption, and a new dawn for the kingdom. Elara and Kelthar stood together, hands entwined, hearts aligned, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The throne of shadows had been challenged, and Vailrath would endure. And yet, as the wind carried through the castle towers, a quiet whisper lingered, a promise that destiny never truly rests, and that the story of hearts and shadows is never truly finished.